Hello, everyone. I'm Emily Walker with the U.S. Embassy Algiers, and you're watching Let's Chat, a weekly program brought to you by the American Cultural Center Algiers. We also have cultural centers in 4 other locations around Algeria: Constantine, Oran, Wergela, and Bishar. And I encourage you to pay one of those centers a visit when they reopen. We do fun things like conversation clubs. There's English language books you can check out, and there are talks like this one that you're about to hear. We are really excited for today's talk because we have a famous American as our guest. Peter Sagal is a well-known radio personality, humorist, author, playwright, and he's going to discuss the role of satire in America. Peter is best known for his very popular and long-running satire trivia and talk radio program called Wait, Wait, Don't Tell Me. It's likely that many of you watching this program from Algeria have not heard of Wait, Wait, Don't Tell Me. So to give you a little taste of what this program is, Peter has been kind enough to agree to answer some trivia questions about Algeria. Peter, do you know much about Algeria?
I know, and I can say this with some certainty, absolutely nothing about Algeria.
Absolutely nothing. Okay, well, I think you should do very well with these trivia.
Hold on, I take that back. I can spell it in English.
That
I
is
can
something.
do that. That is one thing I know. I apologize to everyone for my complete and total ignorance. And someday I hope to go there and fix that. But please proceed.
Inshallah, as they would say here. I hope you do get to visit.
Inshallah.
So we have another special guest, although much less famous than Peter, who's going to ask these trivia questions to Peter. That special guest is Adam Sigelman, our cultural attaché at the U.S. Embassy. He also happens to be my husband, and he's streaming in from the next room in our house here in Algiers. Adam?
All right, thanks, Emily, and hi, Peter. It's really an honor for us to do this. I've had a lot of U.S. diplomats reach out to me this past week to tell me how jealous they are that we're doing this with you and how much they love your show, which provides us all a lifeline back to our country. Though at times, I have to say, it also makes us happy to be so far away from all the craziness.
Yes, I can see that.
So you're the host of Wait, Wait, Don't Tell Me. So we're going to play a game with you today that we're calling Stena Matkulish, which is literally just a translation of Wait, Wait, Don't Tell Me into Algerian Arabic. Great. So we're going to ask you, you should know this game, 3 questions about the country of Algeria. If you get 2 out of 3 of them right, you win a prize from one of our viewers today, which is the voice of any U.S. Embassy Algiers diplomat on their voicemail in heavily accented Arabic.
All right.
Emily, who is Peter playing for? Oh, no, Emily, you're muted. The old Zoom.
Again, Peter is playing for Nadia Garbi, who's from Constantine.
Oh. Okay, great.
All right, Peter, Nadia, I'll do my best.
The French, as you may know, colonized Algeria for 130 years, up until Algeria won its hard-earned independence in 1962. What event in 1830 did King Charles V of France use to justify the first French invasion of Algerian soil? Was it A, the day of Algiers slapped French consul Pierre de Val with a fly swatter following failed negotiations over a wheat purchase? Or B, a group of Algerian revolutionaries defaced a portrait of King Charles V by painting dog ears and a tail on his body? Or C, Algerian authorities ordered the closure of the French ambassador's favorite boulangerie in Algiers for health code violations?
All right. Now, I just want to say that when we do our quiz, we try to make it easy for the person, and this is somewhat hard. So already you're departing from my model. But one of the things that our guests do when they have no idea what the answer is they pick the one that they hope is true. So I'm going to pick A, the fly swatter, because frankly, that's hilarious.
And you're correct. That is the right answer. And there is there's a well-known painting of this particular event that you can check out. Unfortunately for us in the diplomatic trade, it's a tactic that's no longer in vogue. Question number 2. You got one right. Just need one more. Soukran Tayeh Fidrouj is a well-known Algerian dish made up of minced lamb rolled into eggplant slices. What does the name of the dish translate to in English? Is it A, halal pigs in a blanket, B, drunk man falling down the stairs, or C, how to win back the ex who cheated on you?
Tell me the name in Arabic again,
Okay,
as if it will help.
Sukran,
Go ahead.
Sukran Tayyip Daruj.
Again, well, first of all, pigs in blankets, my favorite thing to eat. But strangely, I don't think that a Muslim society would compliment their own dish by calling it pork. So I'm not gonna. I'm gonna eliminate that one. I'm going to pick the third one, the dish that will bring your ex back to you. I like that. Again, it's my favorite one.
You sure that's that your final answer, Peter?
Oh, now you see, now I appreciate that, because that's what I do, is I try to steer my guest off the wrong answer. That's very kind of you. So instead, I'm going to go for B.
And you are correct. Drunk man falling down the stairs. Actually don't know how it got that name. Maybe one of our viewers can tell us in a comment in the chat. Okay, you're doing very well. You've got 2 right. Let's see if you can be perfect. Question number 3. Algeria is home to some of the earliest prehistoric art known to humankind. According to local myth, what does the famous Crying Cows cave painting in the Sahara Desert depict? Is it A, a shepherd who, after searching night and day for a spring, watched his flock of cows die of thirst one by one?
Yikes.
B, an ancient Tuareg funeral ritual in which mourners would often use cows as stand-ins for the deceased? Or C, an unsuccessful attempt to get the prehistoric cavemen to eat more chicken?
All right. Since I've already won, I'm going to pick C, which indicates that Chick-fil-A is a lot older than we thought it was, and I'm going to stick to it too. I'm going to pick C.
All right, Peter. Unfortunately, the correct answer is A. It was the shepherd who watched his flock die one by one, according to the myth.
Now, you see, wouldn't it be better if the real answer were C? I'm trying to create a better world.
I know.
It would be a good way to, we're supposed to share American culture with our audience here, and Chick-fil-A is a very popular restaurant in the United States, so we're sharing culture.
And Chick-fil-A features in their advertisements a bunch of cows urging us all to eat more chicken. So, well, inside joke there.
Emily, how did Peter do in our quiz?
Well, he got 2 out of 3 right, so that makes him a winner.
Yay.
All right, thanks for indulging us with this, Peter. Now over to you for your presentation.
Sure, thank you very much. This is an absolute honor for me. I've been doing this for a long time, hosting my radio show, 22 years in fact, and this is the first time I've ever been invited to speak to another country via the US Embassy, and I am flattered and I'm a little nervous. I hope I don't cause some sort of international incident or war. That, believe me, it's a possibility. So I've been asked to talk a little bit about satire in America, how it's worked historically, as someone who does it. I think before I say anything else, I should try to define what satire is. First, as you were told, I host a radio show called Wait, Wait, Don't Tell Me. It is a quiz about the week's news, but it really is a comedy show, a satirical comedy show about the week's news that is disguised as a quiz. In other words, as you probably heard, we really don't care who wins or loses. It's just an opportunity to make jokes about the news. We've been doing it for 22 years, as I said, and we're part of what I call the satirical industrial complex. There's so many people in America right now doing what we do that we're just one part of it. We have many late night hosts who host television shows that do what we do. There are other people on the internet and on radio who do what we do. So we're part of a large cultural moment in America. Satire is a kind of humor that is meant to make fun of or to apply humor to sometimes very serious or real topics. Satires can be done of movies or books or television. Satires can be done of history, and satire is often done towards or about politics, powerful people and institutions, in which we make fun of those powerful people and institutions. And satire, as I understand it, has a long history going back many, many hundreds of years. One of my favorite satirists was the English author Jonathan Swift, who lived in Ireland during the English occupation of that country in the 18th century, and was so appalled by the way that the British treated the Irish that instead of writing, shall we say, serious attacks on his own people, he wrote satires, making fun of them. And we continue that long tradition on my somewhat silly radio show. Let me tell you what satire isn't before I tell you what it is. Satire, despite what people might say or people who do it might hope, really isn't good at causing political change. We know that because we've had it in America for a very, very long time. And it's very hard to find any example of a satirist, a humorist, a comedian like myself, making any real change to anything. You may have heard of Abraham Lincoln, who we in America consider to be our greatest president, who in the 19th century saved the country during our Civil War and also ended our terrible, terrible institution of slavery. Well, Abraham Lincoln, during his lifetime and his presidency, was horribly satirized in very crude ways that we today would find offensive. He was compared to wild animals. They made fun of the way he looked. They made fun of the way he talked. They made fun of his background as an uneducated country person. And today, we don't remember any of that. And we can also say with certainty that the satire of Abraham Lincoln did not stop him in any way from doing all the great things that he did. And that's been true in American history from then pretty much up until the current moment. It's very hard to find an instance where a satirist, such as myself, led to real change. And the reason for that, I think, has to do with the nature of comedy and the nature of politics. Basically, satire is comedy, and comedy's only purpose should be to make people laugh. That's it. Whenever another purpose comes into play, whenever you say, I want to make people laugh so that I can make them think X or make them do Y, then you're all of a sudden not being very funny. There's another reason, which is that, of course, satire makes people hopefully happy, but politics actually affects people's lives in real ways. Let me give you a recent example of what I mean. As you may or may not know, one of the big political issues in America is healthcare and how much the government should be involved in providing healthcare to our citizens. You probably know, well, I don't know that you know, that after many decades of trying, in 2010, President Barack Obama helped pass a law that gave more healthcare from the government to more citizens. It's called Obamacare, or the Affordable Care Act. And as you may know, the other political party, the Republicans that were opposed to President Obama, very, very much opposed this law. And they spent many years condemning it, saying it was terrible, and trying to undo it. In 2016, of course, President Trump, a Republican, was elected here in the United States, along with Republicans who controlled our parliament, our Congress, both houses of it. So they had complete power. And one of the things that they immediately tried to do once they had won power back from the Democrats is to undo that law, to repeal, as one says, the Affordable Care Act. This became a very big argument in America, and the Republicans came very close to doing it, but they ultimately failed. It was a very, very close thing. It was one vote in the Senate, the upper house of our Congress. Looking back on that political fight, a lot of people talk about the contribution of a man named Jimmy Kimmel. Now, Jimmy Kimmel is one of the people who I mentioned earlier. He does what I do, except he does it on television every night for an audience of millions. Jimmy Kimmel is a very, very funny man. He's been a comedian his whole life and has never had a reputation, even among comedians, for being very serious. There are other comedians in America and elsewhere who do very political material, but not Jimmy Kimmel. Jimmy Kimmel is much more of a social satirist. He makes fun of people. He loves to make fun of Hollywood celebrities. He likes to invite them onto his show to make fun of themselves. That's what he does. So how did Jimmy Kimmel, this comedian, help stop the repeal of this healthcare law? i.e., how did he stop the Republicans from undoing it and taking government healthcare from a lot of people? He didn't do it by making jokes at all. He did it because on one now very famous night, he went on his television show and spoke to millions of people that night, and many, many more millions as that moment on television was spread on the internet, on YouTube. And he talked about his own son, his own infant son, who was very, very ill, who I believe had cancer. And he talked about how his son's life was saved by doctors and hospitals who did wonderful, wonderful, miraculous work to save his son's life. And then he talked about how lucky he was as a wealthy man with a good job and excellent health insurance to have access to the doctors who saved his son's life. And he talked then about how awful it would be to not have those advantages, to not have the ability to take a sick child to the doctor, to worry about money instead of the health of his child. And as he spoke that night, he made no jokes at all. In fact, he became very emotional and almost started to cry. In fact, he might have cried as he talked about his sick son. That moment, which, as we say, went viral on the internet, is credited with changing a lot of minds, with encouraging people to get in touch with their political leaders and argue to keep that law. So that's an instance where a satirist actually changed politics, perhaps, affecting people's lives, but he didn't do it with jokes. He did it by being very, very serious. And frankly, I think that's how it should be. I think that politics, government is a very serious business, and the decisions that are made by politicians about our lives shouldn't be made because of jokes. They should be made because of serious issues like health. Now, let me say a little further about satire, what it can and can't do. When I first got my job, I thought that I would, as we say, speak truth to power. There's a tradition in English language culture. I don't know if it's the same in Arabic culture. I know Arabic has extraordinarily rich literary tradition. Maybe it's there as well. But the tradition is only the jester, the clown, can speak truth to the king. We have a famous play by William Shakespeare about King Lear, about a terrible king, and the only person who's allowed to tell him about the mistakes he's making is his jester, his fool, his clown. So I thought, based on that tradition, that when I started doing my job, making fun of powerful people, I would be speaking truth to power. Only I could tell the truth to the powerful. Well, it turns out the problem with speaking truth to power is the power doesn't listen. Power doesn't listen to comedians. And that at first was a little humbling, but then I realized that that is how it should be. It's actually important that the people with power pay little attention to people like me. And I'll tell you why. Well, first I'll give you an example. Perhaps you folks have heard of President Clinton and his terrible scandal during the late 90s and the early 2000s. Now, that happened just as our show was beginning in 1998. President Clinton, as you may remember, had an affair with a young woman in his office. It became a scandal. his opponents, who controlled the Congress at that time, investigated him, and they tried to remove him from office. It was a huge, huge story here in America for many, many, many months. And on my show, we made fun of President Clinton an awful lot because we had learned so much about his, shall we say, personal secrets. Many, many, many people in our country made fun of President Clinton because of what we had learned about his private life. Okay. Many years later, more than 10, President Clinton was a guest on my show. And I asked him how he felt about all the people making fun of him all those years in very personal ways. And he said something that might be surprising. He laughed and said that he enjoyed it. He enjoyed the people imitating him. He enjoyed the jokes. In fact, he did an event where he, the President of the United States, perhaps the most powerful person in the world, invited one of the men who had impersonated him on a satirical television show to join him and imitate him right next to the real person. That's how much he enjoyed it. And I think that is admirable. And I think you can say the same about President George W. Bush, our President Barack Obama, and pretty much all the presidents going back in our modern age. They were all made fun of, and none of them minded, or none of them at least complained in public. Some of them we now know really didn't like it privately, but they didn't say so publicly. And the reason that's important is because when you think about a political leader, you don't want that. Let me back up a little bit. When you think about a political leader, especially a powerful one like the president of a country, you know that that political leader has to make very difficult decisions every day. Those decisions will be life and death for many people, whether to start a war or not, whether to institute a program or not, whether to put resources here rather than there. Those are very, very difficult decisions. And the last thing you want before that person makes his decision is to think about what somebody like me is going to say about it. You don't want that person to think about, oh, if I do this, they might make fun of me. You want them to think only about what's best for their country or people. And for the most part, we have enjoyed that in America. For the most part, we have enjoyed leaders who, although they're made fun of in our great American tradition, either don't mind, ignore it, or pretend to ignore it. Now, our current president is very sensitive about this sort of thing, and that may or may not be a good thing, but I certainly would agree, I think everybody would agree, that the decisions that our president makes are more important than, say, how funny I am on the radio. So I have said what I think satire can't do. It can't make change. It doesn't speak truth to power, and it shouldn't speak truth to power. All right. What does it do? Why are there so many people here in America doing it? Why do so many people listen to my radio show or watch Mr. Kimmel on television, or Stephen Colbert or Trevor Noah or any of the other great satirists who we have working today? And they're all quite brilliant. Why? What are we doing? What good do we do? And I think the answer is two things. First, we help to democratize politics. And what I mean by that doesn't have anything to do with voting or the structure of government. What it means is that we help people understand that all of us in our democratic society are the same. i.e., I'm sitting here in my little house, the president is sitting in his very large house, but we are both the same. We are both just American citizens. And sometimes when we are, let me put it this way, it's a very important part of the American idea that everybody is the same under the law and in society, no matter what job they might have. Rich, poor, powerful, weak, someone who works with his hands all day versus someone who works at the highest level of government, we are all the same. Now, of course, those powerful people appear powerful. They are wealthy, they are powerful, they live in mansions and fly on airplanes and drive around in limousines. So a lot of what we do is we poke fun at those people. We show you that they're just human, just like us. In fact, if you think about the great satire, a lot of it isn't really about political positions. It's about politicians as people. We make fun of them because they're just humans, just like us. And because they're so powerful, that serves a purpose. It helps remind everybody that here in our democratic society, we are all at least supposed to be equal. The other thing it does, and I'll say one thing that's important about satire. There's a saying in a comedy and in satire that it should always be punching up. Punching up. What does that mean? It means that we recognize that there's a hierarchy of different levels of society. There are the rich and the powerful, and then there are these people and these people going downwards to the poorest citizen. And it is very important for those of us who do what I do, never to punch down at the people who are less fortunate, less powerful, less well-known than we are, but always to punch up, always to make fun of the people who are wealthier, who are more powerful. So on our show, we'll make fun of politicians like the president, powerful senators or governors, very wealthy people like Jeff Bezos of Amazon or Hollywood people. That's important to make sure that we're always making fun of the people who are all above us, as opposed to adding problems to the people who are lower on that scale of wealth and power. The second and most important thing that we do, and this I think ultimately is why I get up and enjoy doing my job every week, is very simple. We make people feel better about what's going on in the world. Because as I'm sure you know, it's very easy to talk about these things, but these issues of politics and power have very, very real effect on people. I was referring to a big issue in America earlier about healthcare. Well, that's a very, very serious issue to some people, and they might be worried, they might be scared, they might be anxious. Well, I can't, from my position in this life, help them get healthcare. That's not something I can do. But for an hour a week, myself and my colleagues can provide comedy and humor that might make them feel a little less worried, a little less anxious, that might help them get through their day. And in fact, I have heard over the years, let me put it this way, I have never heard once from a powerful person who's ever said to me, "Oh, thank you for making your jokes. You helped me decide what to do with my power." That's never happened. It never will happen. What I have heard many, 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 many times over the years is people telling me that our silly little show helps them get through hard times. And sometimes those hard times are personal. A dear friend or relative has died. They've lost their job. They've had terrible luck. They themselves got sick and went through a bad illness. Sometimes it's just dealing with all the news that we have to deal with and the crises going on, be they fires in the west coast of America or any other problem. And they say, "Oh, listening to your show helped me." Sometimes I got through a week looking forward to that show. There's a saying in America, maybe all over the English speaking world, which is you can either laugh or you can cry. And as I said, sometimes, as with Mr. Jimmy Kimmel, crying is useful, and that's the appropriate response. But if you cry all day, it doesn't do much for your energy and your attitude about life. So we provide humor. We provide release of tension. We provide just a bright spot in what sometimes seems like a very dark world. And that's what I'm most proud of. Like I said, and I'll finish my little presentation. I have learned over the years that we will never change the world. That is not my job. Changing the world is done by people who are very serious and who work very hard at their serious work, as difficult as it may be. My work isn't hard. I just make jokes. But while I will never change the world, I might make the world for 1 hour a week to people who happen to listen to my radio show a little happier. And that, I think, is enough, and I'm proud of it. So with all of that, I'd be happy to take any of your questions, or maybe I can ask questions myself, but I'd love to hear what you have to say.
Great. Thank you so much for that. That was very thoughtful and interesting. We have a bunch of people watching on YouTube who I encourage to ask questions to Peter in the comments. If you want to know anything about how satire works in America, anything about his career, feel free to ask that. And Peter, you also can ask questions and I'll feed those back to you.
Sure.
I have a question for you. You said, you just write jokes. Question about writing the jokes. I know you write jokes and your staff probably also writes jokes and you go over them and talk about them before the show. How do you decide? Do you have a way of deciding if a joke is funny, if it's not funny, if it goes too far? Do you have any sort of method you use to decide what's funny?
That's a very good question. In fact, it's the central question to anybody who does what I do. We're doing comedy. How do you know what's funny? The answer is, and it's the only possible answer, is if it makes us laugh. That's it. I work with 7 or 8 people, as you suggest, and we spend a lot of time writing jokes, trying out jokes on each other, and it's always what makes us laugh. The only way to be successful at comedy, and I've tried it every other way, trust me, is to do and say things that you find funny and then hope that other people will find it funny too. That's it. You may not be fortunate. You may find that your sense of humor is so unique that not enough other people enjoy it, which is bad for your career as a comedian. But the only thing I can tell you is once you start thinking, well, what will other people find funny? It's dumb. You'll never succeed because you've lost touch with your own sensibility. And the only thing you can do in this world is speak for yourself. If you try to channel other people, then what's the point? The role of anybody in this world who does what I do, be they a comedian or a writer or an artist of any kind, is to simply present to the world what you think should be in the world. In my case, it's jokes. In other people's cases, it's novels or songs or film. And hopefully other people will agree with you. Yes, that's a good thing that's in the world. It's a good thing that that movie was made. I loved it. It's a good thing that joke was made. It's hilarious. That's the only way to be, I think.
I imagine that must be rather difficult though, because you do consume other satire. You probably watch Kimmel, you watch Trevor Noah. You probably have friends who are very funny, who have their specific point of view. So I imagine
it is a challenge. Yeah.
It must be difficult to kind of keep that vision on what you think is funny and what you want to say without being influenced.
It is very, very hard. As you say, there are a lot of people who are very, very talented who do what we do, and they do it very, very well. And since we are a show that broadcasts on the weekend, usually Saturday, and my colleagues, competitors, people like Stephen Colbert, they go every night. A lot of times by the time we get to a topic, they've already had their chances. And so, yes, it's difficult because a lot of times they've already made jokes. Well, I guess I could say nobody ever said our job was going to be easy. And it just means it's that much more important to figure out what our take is, what hasn't been said yet. What do we see about this incident, this issue in the news that no one else does? And I got to tell you, sometimes we don't do it. Sometimes we just say to ourselves, I don't know how to make this funny in a way that's new and interesting, and we move on to something else. But a lot of times it's possible, but just with a lot of work. I'll say one other thing about our show, which makes it different from other people's shows. Other people's shows, like the ones we've been discussing, are in the classic style of what the BBC News or the British people call a presenter. Somebody like this, alone on a screen, speaking into a camera, delivering jokes and comments. And I do that a little bit, obviously, into a microphone, not a screen. But one of the things that we have on our show is we have a group of people. Every week we have comedians and writers of various kinds who are very funny. And so although we do a lot of preparation, a lot of times what our show ends up being is a conversation happening for real in real time between myself and very other funny people. And that has a certain appeal. To listen to very funny, interesting people have a real conversation in which we make jokes, gives our show a feel of a conversation that we're inviting our audience to, as opposed to inviting people just to sit still and listen while I talk at them. And I think that's an important part of our success.
I completely agree with that. And again, for anyone maybe who's just tuning in, Peter Sagal is a host of a podcast called Wait, Wait, Don't Tell Me. You should definitely find it, listen to it, and it's a very good English practice, and we'll show you more of what he's talking about here. Peter, a question that came in from YouTube from Me Leo. She wants to know who the pioneers of satire are in America.
The pioneers of satire, we go back a long way, as I said. I think probably, if you were to look at our modern tradition, you'd have to start with Mark Twain, who was, of course, a great American writer of the 19th century primarily. And he's known for writing very scathing satires of the world as he saw it. The world that he grew up in was a world with slavery and a kind of apartheid. And he wrote a wonderful novel, one of the great novels in English, called Huckleberry Finn, which very subtly, but with great wisdom and kindness in its heart, satirized the world of his time, including the idea of slavery and racial superiority. But also not just that, he satirized American commerce and capitalism. He satirized the rich. He satirized fools he satirized the religious. And he did it from a real place of compassion for the people he was writing about, even sometimes the people he made fun of. Moving into the 20th century, we've had great satirists who wrote and started to appear on broadcast. I am a particular fan of the great comedian Groucho Marx, who started in film and ended up doing what I do. In fact, I consider him my sort of spiritual ancestor. He hosted a quiz show, first on radio and then on television in the 1950s, in which the quiz, it was called You Bet Your Life, was really just an excuse for Groucho to make jokes. And he had an energy to him that I admired, which could be called an energy of anarchy. In other words, to him, nothing was serious, and he would make fun of anybody and anything. He had that energy of the mischievous clown, and I love that. And that's sometimes what I try to do. There are other comedians in America who've done wonderful things. We think of comedians like Mort Sahl from the 1950s, Lenny Bruce from the 1960s. And then, of course, we get into the 1970s with the rise of a wonderful magazine that was very influential on me called National Lampoon, another magazine called Mad Magazine, which satirized everybody and everything, and in which that began to attract some of the most interesting and funny and intelligent people, launching a television. Many of those people from National Lampoon founded the TV show Saturday Night Live, which is probably our most important satirical TV show. It's been going on for 45 years. And then from that point, starting in the 70s, it exploded with so many people being inspired by the people I've mentioned, growing up to do comedy of all kinds. And now, of course, as I've said, we have not just the people on television, but also wonderful writers of comedy and satire, like The Onion is a wonderful online magazine. One of my favorite writers, a young woman named Alexandra Petri, who writes for the Washington Post and does brilliant, intelligent satire. So, I mean, in a weird way, it's one of America's most profitable products these days.
Thanks for that. Question from Optimistic Fellow. Did any of your satires make you face real problems like being put in jail?
I am very proud to say no. And when I say proud, I mean that I live and I understand how lucky I am to live in a country where that is not really a danger. Not yet, anyway. Throughout our history, through hard times and bad, people like me have always had the freedom to say what we will about people in power. That is a very important American tradition. And I am very aware of how rare that is in this world, that there are other countries ruled by people who do not like to be made fun of. And sometimes they have punished the people who do what I do very severely, or at the very least, driven them into exile. That happened in Egypt recently, where a very famous comedian known as the John Stewart of Egypt was forced into exile because the regime of General Sisi decided they did not want to be made fun of. Again, I say that knowing that it's something that makes America, among other countries, unique, that it is something that we need to protect, and something that could be lost unless we are very careful.
Thank you for that thoughtful answer. This is a comment that came in on YouTube from Bilal Hamal. He says, or she, satire should be constructive, but not destructive. And I'm wondering if you agree with that sentiment. Constructive, but not.
I think I do. I mean, it's the sort of thing that you'd want to talk about at length with examples. But I do believe ultimately that satire should always be pointed at making a better world, or since I've already said that we never will actually affect anything, maybe better to say pointing toward a better world. If you're making fun of somebody for being cruel, as Jonathan Swift did many centuries ago, you're doing that in the hope that someday people might be less cruel, might be kinder. If you're making fun of somebody for being dumb, as I often do, you're doing it in the hope that they might be smarter, or we might have smarter people in those roles. If you're making fun of people for being silly, you're doing it in the hope that they might be more serious in doing their jobs and their responsibilities. So yes, I agree. And it is also true that I generally don't like the kind of comedy that seems to indicate everybody is terrible, everything is terrible, everything is stupid, and there's no point to even trying. So if you mean satire that tears down by that, then I agree with you. I personally don't like that, and I hope that I haven't done that.
Mm-hmm. Thanks for that. A question from Sawson Spencer, who asks, don't you think that satire serves as a safety valve for society?
Oh, I do. Yes, go on, please.
Oh, I was going to interpret, I mean, a safety valve, I guess another way to ask it is, do you think sometimes that it's safer to put your views in satire or in a joke form rather than coming out and say them? That's how I interpreted that question. But
a safety valve. Well, I interpreted it a little differently, but I'll answer your point. Yes, it is sometimes. One of the things that I am aware of as a comedian is that I can say things that other people can't. My show is produced by a company called NPR, which is roughly like the BBC in Britain. It is a national radio service that its main business is providing news, and it employs many, many serious journalists. One of the reasons that people, I think, like my show is because they know that I and my friends can say things as comedy that my colleagues who are serious journalists could never say, because it's very important for them to be objective or neutral, to just report facts and not opinions. That's very, very important. And I think that it's more important than what I do for reasons I've said. But because I'm making jokes, I can make jokes about the powerful. I can make jokes about the serious issues of the day in a way that they couldn't. So yes, comedy is a safety valve. It allows you to say things in a weird way. Going back to what I said earlier, the idea of the jester, the clown being able to say things nobody else can, that still is true, even if the king doesn't listen. Mm-hmm. In terms of a safety valve for society, usually in American English, safety valve means something that lets off pressure, lets off steam so that a machine stays safe. And in a way, if that's what you mean by the question, I still agree, because I think, again, being able to joke about things makes them seem less serious in a way that makes it easier to deal with. If we weren't allowed to joke about things, if we lived in a world in which that was illegal, I think things would be a lot lot harder to manage than they are now.
Mhm. Thanks for that. And we might just do one more question. You
Sure.
guys can questions going on YouTube if you want, but I think one last question here. Maura Mo says there's a fine line between mockery and offense. Race, gender, religion, some of these things maybe might be things you're not going to joke about. Do you consider that in your work?
Yes, we do, very much so. We always consider ourselves to serve the audience. We want to make the audience happy for all the reasons I mentioned. And so for us, it's not a question of what we call political correctness. Oh, you can't talk about that. It's more, we don't want to make people feel worse than we do. So we're not going to make jokes about people who are sick. We're not going to make jokes about people who are suffering through no fault of their own. We're not going to make jokes about the victims of tragedies. And as long as we only want to make jokes that our audience will find funny, meaning it's about things they find funny. So we listen to each other among our colleagues. If somebody says, oh, that's a tasteless joke, joke does not make me feel good, that makes me feel bad for the people you're making fun of, we listen to that very, very seriously. Because like I said, the last thing in the world we want to do is make somebody feel worse than they already do, especially these days.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. Maybe we can just close by any final thoughts you have, perhaps advice for Algerians who want to explore this, who want to produce comedy, make comedy, kind of have their voices heard. So maybe a young satirist starting out, what would you suggest?
I'd suggest, first of all, it's a wonderful thing. And I think because satire is the sign of a healthy society, the more you do it, the better and more healthy your society will be. But all I can return to is what I said earlier, that the only thing you can do that will work is be true to your own voice. Talk about what you want to talk about. Make the jokes that make you laugh. Describe the things that you find funny. And it may not work, sadly. You may put those things on the internet or however else you want to do it, and not enough people will enjoy it, in which case that's sad. But nothing else works. And if you start only, you may have to start by imitating the people you admire. Many, many artists of all kinds do. But if that's all you ever do, then frankly, what are you adding to your own society if you're just repeating what other people say? So I encourage everyone to do the very, very hard work of finding out what your own voice says, what you find funny, what you think what you think about the world, and share that as honestly and as skillfully as you can. And if you're as lucky as I have been, then enough people will agree with you. Good luck.
Great, Peter. Thank you so much for that message. Really, really appreciate you being here today to talk to us and to talk to Algerians. I hope you learned a few things about Algeria during that trivia.
I did. I look forward to visiting Algeria someday and showing off my knowledge of the country.
We so hope that can happen. We can help you plan a trip here if you'd like.
That would be awesome.
Great. And thank you so much for everyone watching on YouTube. Please do subscribe to our channel so you won't miss talks like this. We usually do them every Wednesday. So again, Peter, thank you so much for your time. Thanks everyone for watching. Have a great day.
My pleasure. Thanks everybody for listening. Stay safe, and I hope I'll see you in person someday soon.